Chapter 1. The frosty vale on the outskirts of a forgotten village wrapped in the icy grip of winter, the ancient oaks whispered secrets of the old days. Snow blanketed the crooked houses like a suffocating shroud, and the night sky, devoid of stars, loomed ominously overhead. In the heart of this desolate village stood a dilapidated inn, its walls groaning under the weight of centuries. The wandering spirit, as it was called, had not welcomed a guest in many moons, yet tonight, the faint glow of a candle flickered behind frost-kissed windows. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay. Old portraits adorned the walls, their eyes seeming to follow anyone daring enough to cross the threshold. The innkeeper, a gaunt man named Elias, huddled by the dying fire, lost in the pages of a tattered journal. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door creaked open, breaking the silence. A gust of frigid air swept through the room, extinguishing the candle and sending a chill down Elias's spine. Standing in the doorway was a cloaked figure, face obscured by the shadows. "Good evening," the stranger's voice was a cold whisper, sending shivers through the room. "Might I find shelter here for the night?" Elias, accustomed to solitude, nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Aye, you can. But we're not used to visitors this time of year. What brings you to the wandering spirit?" The stranger stepped closer, lowering the hood to reveal sharp, penetrating eyes. "I'm a collector of tales," he replied, his voice smooth as silk yet carrying an undercurrent of danger. "I travel in search of stories forgotten by time. And I've heard this village holds a dark past." Intrigued and wary, Elias gestured to a dusty chair by the fire. "Aye, that it does. Care to hear one as the fire warms your bones?" The stranger nodded, settling into the chair as Elias added a log to the fire, sparks flying into the cold air. "Many years ago," Elias began, his voice dropping to a whisper, "this village was home to a family unlike any other. The Blackwoods. They lived in the manor at the edge of the woods, now nothing but ruins smothered by ivy and thyme." The stranger leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural intensity. "Go on." "The Blackwoods were feared by the villagers. Rumors of witchcraft and dark rituals surrounded them like the fog that clings to the river at dawn. It was said they could summon spirits and command the dead." "And what became of them?" the stranger asked, his tone eager. "One night, much like this one, the villagers, driven by fear and anger, stormed the manor. They found the family in the midst of a sinister rite. The air was thick with the scent of incense and blood, and shadows danced on the walls as if alive." Elias paused, the flickering flames casting ghostly shadows on his face. In their wrath, the villagers set the manor ablaze, trapping the Blackwoods inside. But as the flames consumed the house, a terrible scream pierced the night, echoing through the woods. They say it was a curse that would doom any who dared to disturb the Blackwoods' rest. The stranger sat motionless, absorbed in the tale. "Is that why the village is deserted?" "Aye," Elias whispered, leaning closer. "It is said that on nights like this, the spirits of the Blackwoods roam the village, seeking vengeance. No one who has seen them has lived to tell the tale." Outside, the wind howled, as if mourning the tragic fate of the Blackwoods. The stranger's eyes flickered with an unreadable emotion. "But that's not the end of the story," Elias continued, his voice barely audible over the wind. "There's something in the woods, something ancient and malevolent that even the Blackwoods feared." The stranger's breath seemed to catch in his throat. "What is it?" Elias's face went pale, his eyes darting to the dark windows. "They say it's the heart of the curse, the source of the darkness that envelops this place. And tonight," he swallowed hard, his voice trembling, "tonight it is stirring." Just then, a loud knock echoed through the inn, causing both men to startle. The fire flickered violently, casting elongated shadows against the walls as if the spirits themselves were awakening. Who could that be? Elias muttered, his voice filled with dread. The stranger stood, his cloak falling around him like a dark cloud. Shall we find out? He asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and fear. As Elias scary stories for a long, cold, and spooky night chapter 2, the knock in the night. As Elias reluctantly approached the door, his hands trembled slightly. The wind howled as if warning him against opening it. Beside him, the stranger's presence was an eerie calm in the storm of fear that filled the room. With a deep breath, Elias gripped the iron handle, the metal icy against his skin, and slowly pulled the door open. The moon, hidden behind thick clouds, cast a ghostly light over the figure standing in the threshold. It was a young woman, her clothes tattered, snowflakes clinging to her dark hair. Her eyes, wide and frantic, scanned the room before settling on the two men. Please, her voice was a desperate whisper, you must help me. Elias, though cautious, stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The stranger watched silently, his gaze intense and calculating. What troubles you, child? Elias asked, closing the door against the biting wind. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. My brother, he ventured into the woods this evening, lured by tales of hidden treasures. He hasn't returned, and I fear the spirits have taken him. The stranger stepped forward, his interest piqued. What tales? Speak plainly. Her eyes flickered with fear. Legends tell of an old crypt hidden beneath the ruins of the Blackwood Manor, said to hold the fortunes of 100 lost souls. But those who seek it are never seen again. Elias exchanged a glance with the stranger. The spirits of the Blackwoods guard their secrets well, he murmured. It's foolhardy to enter those woods, especially at night. But I must find him, the woman pleaded, her voice breaking. He's all the family I have left. The stranger's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. I will go, he declared, his tone resolute. I will find your brother and learn the truth of these woods. Elias looked at him in surprise. You risk the curse. The curse, the stranger replied, is but a chapter in the tale I seek to complete. With that, he turned to the woman. Lead me to where he entered the woods. I will return with your brother. Grateful tears filled her eyes as she nodded, leading the way out into the chilling night. As they stepped outside, the village seemed to sigh with the weight of its haunted past. The snow crunched under their feet as they made their way to the edge of the woods, the trees standing like dark sentinels against the sky. Here, the woman said, stopping at a narrow path that disappeared into the thicket. He went this way. The stranger nodded, pulling his cloak tighter around him. Wait for us at the inn. We shall return by dawn. With a deep breath, he stepped into the shadows of the trees, the branches creaking ominously as if mourning his folly. Back at the inn, Elias paced before the fire, worry etched deeply into his features. The woman sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, her expression one of hope and fear intertwined. Meanwhile, the stranger moved silently through the woods, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The trees seemed to whisper around him, the wind carrying snippets of forgotten conversations and cries of despair. Every step took him deeper into the heart of the curse, the very air thick with the scent of decay and old magic. Suddenly, a faint light caught his attention. It flickered through the trees like a beacon. Drawing closer, he found a lantern lying in the snow, its light dim but steady. Benedict, he called softly, picking up the lantern. There was no response, only the rustle of leaves and the distant howl of a wolf. Pressing on, the stranger's senses were alert to any sign of the missing brother. The crypt, if the tales were true, would be hidden beneath the ruins of the Blackwood Manor, a place shunned by all who valued their souls. After what felt like hours, the ruins loomed ahead, their silhouette a stark reminder of the village's dark history. The moon, breaking through the clouds, bathed the crumbling stones in a ghostly glow. As he approached, the air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Something was watching him. He could feel it, the lingering presence of the Blackwoods, or perhaps something older, something that had been waiting for a foolhardy soul to step into its trap. He paused, listening. The wind seemed to carry a whisper, a soft, sinister voice that chuckled at his courage. Seeking secrets, seeking truths, beware what you may find. Heart pounding, the stranger pushed open the gate, the iron screeching like a warning cry. The manor's garden, overgrown and wild, whispered of secrets buried deep beneath the scary the sword. The path to the crypt was not marked, but the stranger felt drawn to a particularly dense thicket where the ground was sunken, forming a natural depression in the earth. As he approached, the air grew heavier, as if saturated with the despair of ages. The moonlight revealed the outline of an old, stone doorway, partially collapsed but still standing as a grim sentinel to the secrets that lay below. He brushed aside the ivy and debris, revealing ancient runes etched into the stone. Their meaning was lost to time, but their intent was clear, a warning. Undeterred, the stranger descended the crumbling steps, the air growing colder with each step. The darkness was oppressive, swallowing the weak light from his lantern. He reached the bottom, finding himself in a narrow corridor that echoed with the silence of the forgotten dead. The walls were lined with niches, each holding the skeletal remains of those long past. The air was thick with the must of decay and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of rosemary and sage, herbs used in ancient burial rites to ward off evil spirits. As he moved deeper into the crypt, the shadows seemed to move with him, flickering and dancing on the walls as if alive. A cold breeze whispered through the corridor, carrying with it a voice so faint he thought he might have imagined it. Turn back, it urged, a ghostly plea filled with sorrow and fear. But the stranger pressed on, driven by a need to uncover the truth. The corridor ended at a large, ornate door, its surface carved with scenes of the Blackwoods' rituals, figures cloaked in shadow, their arms raised to a sky swirling with dark energies. He pushed open the door, and the room beyond was a stark contrast to the corridor. It was a large, circular chamber, the ceiling domed and adorned with a faded fresco depicting the night sky. In the center of the room lay a sarcophagus, made of black stone and covered in the same enigmatic runes as the doorway. Approaching the sarcophagus, the stranger felt a palpable sense of dread. The air here was colder, and he could see his breath as he exhaled, the mist forming shapes in the air before dissipating into the darkness. He reached out, his hand hovering over the lid of the sarcophagus, hesitating. Then, with a resolve born of a desire to know, he pushed the lid aside. It moved with a grating sound that seemed to echo into the depths of the earth. Inside, the sarcophagus was empty, save for a single object, a book, its cover bound in leather so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. The pages were yellowed with age, the script written in an elegant but unfamiliar hand. The stranger opened the book, the pages crackling under his touch. As he read, the words seemed to come alive, whispering into his mind, weaving a tale of darkness and despair. The Blackwoods had indeed practiced dark arts, but they were not the originators. They had discovered something ancient and powerful, something that predated even the oldest stories of the village. The voice he had heard was growing louder, a cacophony of whispers that filled the chamber, urging him to leave, warning him of the danger. He realized then that the curse was real, and it was far more terrifying than any story told by the fireside. The stranger looked up from the book, his heart racing. The chamber felt smaller now, the shadows closing in around him. He sensed that he was not alone, that the spirits of the Blackwoods, and perhaps something older, were watching him. He carefully closed the book, placing it back into the sarcophagus. As he did, the whispers grew to a wail, a sound of anger and despair that shook the very ground beneath him. Rushing back to the door, he felt the temperature drop even further, the air thickening with the palpable darkness. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Trapped, he turned back to the sarcophagus, his mind racing for a solution. He needed to escape, to return to the inn, to warn the woman and Elias of what he had found. But as he approached the sarcophagus once more, the ground trembled beneath him. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone floor, and from the depths below, a new sound emerged, a growl so deep and so filled with malice that it seemed to vibrate through his very bones. The crypt was awakening, stirred by his intrusion. The stranger realized he had unwittingly unleashed something that had been contained for centuries, something that the Blackwoods had feared and tried to control. He backed away from the sarcophagus, his mind reeling with fear. Above him, the fresco seemed to come alive, the stars swirling into a vortex that centered directly above the sarcophagus. As scary stories for a long, cold, and spoke as he readied himself for what might emerge from beneath the stone floor, the blackness above seemed to pulsate with an ancient, hungry energy. The growl intensified, echoing around the chamber like the roar of an awakened beast long held captive. His heart pounded against his ribs as he watched the cracks spread, the stone around the sarcophagus crumbling. From the fissures, a mist began to rise, thick and suffocating, swirling around him like the embrace of death. It smelled of earth and decay, of secrets buried and best left untouched. The mist obscured his vision, and he stumbled back, trying to find his way to the door by memory alone. But the room had changed, or perhaps it was the darkness playing tricks on his senses. The door was gone, replaced by a smooth, unyielding wall. Panic set in as he realized he was trapped, sealed within the crypt with whatever horror he had released. The growl morphed into a cacophony of whispers, voices overlapping in a language not spoken by any living soul. They were angry and pained, mourning their long imprisonment and celebrating their impending release. The mist thickened, coalescing into forms that were almost human, twisted by time and torment into grotesque parodies of the villagers who had once condemned them. The stranger pressed his back against the cold stone, his mind racing for any knowledge that might save him. The book? He thought wildly. The answers must be in the book. He lunged towards the sarcophagus, his hands grasping the leather-bound tome once more. Flipping through the pages, he sought anything, a spell, a charm, an incantation, that might quell the spirits and seal the crypt once again. Above him, the vortex in the fresco spun faster, stars blurring into streaks of light that spiraled down towards him. The air was electric, charged with ancient magic and the promise of destruction. The voices grew louder, more insistent, drowning out his own panicked breaths. As he turned a page, his eyes caught a symbol, a sickle that seemed to pulse with power. It was the same as one etched on the inside of the sarcophagus lid, nearly obscured by the shadow of time. He pressed his palm against the page, whispering words that felt as though they were being torn from the depths of his soul. The chamber shook violently, a rumble that threatened to bring the stone ceiling crashing down upon him. The mist recoiled as if in pain, the shadows writhing and twisting in the air. The voices screamed, a sound so terrible he nearly dropped the book. But he held on, repeating the incantation with more force, more desperation. The vortex above began to shrink, the light dimming as the stars retreated into their painted sky. The figures in the mist dissolved into smoke, their cries fading into a wind that no longer felt threatening but mournful. As the last of the mist vanished, the room stilled, the only sound his ragged breaths and the faint drip of water from some hidden source. He looked around, the lantern's light dim but sufficient to show that the room was as it had been when he first entered, the door now back in its rightful place. Exhausted, he tucked the book under his arm and made his way to the door, every muscle tense, waiting for the calm to break. But the crypt remained silent, as if holding its breath along with him. He emerged into the night, the air crisp and cold against his flushed skin. The moon was high, its light clear and sharp, casting long shadows across the ground. The forest seemed to watch him as he staggered back towards the village, the trees whispering among themselves. Back at the inn, the woman and Elias were waiting, anxiety etched into their faces. At the sight of him, relief flooded their expressions, quickly replaced by concern at his disheveled appearance. "What happened?" Elias asked, rushing to support him. The stranger shook his head, unable to fully articulate the horrors he had encountered. "It's over," he managed to say. "The curse, it's contained." But even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. What he had experienced was beyond mere curses and tales of haunted woods. He had touched something primal, something that had existed long before the Blackwoods and would endure long after. He handed the book to the woman, his eyes grave. "Keep this safe," he said. "It holds more than just stories. It holds a legacy of darkness and power that must never be released." The woman nodded, clutching the book to her chest as if it were a precious lifeline. As they settled by the fire, the wind picked up outside, howling through the trees with a mournful cry. The stranger looked into the flames, seeing in them the flicker of ancient stars, the dance of scary stories for a long, cold, and spooky night. Chapter 4. Whispers in the wind. The fire crackled and popped, a small comfort against the encroaching darkness that seemed to press against the windows of the wandering spirit. Outside, the wind carried echoes of a past too restless to remain silent, its whispers creeping through the cracks in the old inn's foundation. The stranger sat silently, his eyes lost in the dance of the flames, reflecting on the night's harrowing events. Beside him, Elias and the woman, whom he had learned was named Clara, watched him with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's not over, is it?" Clara finally asked, her voice low, almost drowned out by the wind. The stranger turned to look at her, his eyes somber. "What I saw tonight, what I felt, it's part of something much larger than us. The curse might be contained, but it's still alive, pulsing under the surface like a heart waiting for the chance to beat again." Elias shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What do we do now? If what you say is true, then this isn't the end." "No," the stranger agreed, "it's not. We must prepare. We must learn from the book and strengthen the seals. This is our duty now, to ensure that what lies beneath does not awaken fully." Clara clutched the book tightly, her knuckles white. "And my brother? Did you find any trace of him?" The stranger's gaze softened. "I found his lantern, but nothing more." "I'm sorry, Clara. The woods keep their secrets well." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she nodded, accepting his words with a heavy heart. "Then we fight not just for ourselves, but for him as well. For all those who have been lost to the shadows of these woods." The night deepened, the wind growing colder, howling like the cries of the damned. The three of them gathered closer to the fire, forming a pact in silence, bound by the shared burden of a threat both ancient and deadly. Chapter 5. The Seal of Shadows. Over the next few weeks, the stranger, whom Clara and Elias came to know as Gabriel, taught them the secrets contained within the book. They studied the ancient runes and practiced the incantations, each word a whisper against the darkness. But the darkness was listening, biding its time. Unseen eyes watched from the shadows, and the wind carried messages between the trees, spreading news of the defenders of the wandering spirit. One evening, as the first snows of winter began to fall again, painting the world in hues of white and grey, Gabriel stood at the edge of the woods. The air was tense, charged with an unspoken anticipation. He could feel the pulse of the curse, a steady beat beneath the frozen earth. Turning to Clara and Elias, who stood behind him with determined faces, he nodded. It's time. We must reinforce the seal tonight, under the cover of the storm. The darkness is most vulnerable now. Armed with the book and the knowledge they had gained, they ventured into the woods, their path lit by the faint glow of their lanterns. The snow muffled their footsteps, a blanket of silence over the land. They reached the ruins of the Blackwood Manor at midnight, the moon a sliver of silver in the sky, watching them through veils of clouds. The air here was colder, an unnatural chill that seeped into their bones. Gabriel led them to the crypt, its entrance marked by the ancient runes they had come to know so well. Together, they recited the incantation, their voices a strong, unified force against the creeping dread. The ground trembled, a low rumble that grew in intensity until it shook the very air around them. From the depths of the earth, a howl rose, a sound of rage and despair that threatened to tear the night apart. But they held their ground, their words weaving a barrier of light around the crypt, sealing it with every syllable. The howl faded, replaced by a silence so profound it was almost deafening. As the last word was spoken, the runes on the crypt glowed a bright, fiery gold, then dimmed to a soft, pulsing blue. The seal was reinforced, stronger and more resilient than before. Exhausted but triumphant, Clara, Elias, and Gabriel made their way back to the inn, the storm covering their tracks, erasing their presence from the woods. Back at the wandering spirit, they collapsed into their chairs, the fire a welcoming warmth against the cold. They had done what many had thought impossible. They had faced the darkness and prevailed. But as they sat there, catching their breaths, each knew that this was but a battle won in a larger war. The curse might be contained. Chapter 6, echoes of the curse. The wind outside the wandering spirit had calmed, as if the forest itself had taken a breath and held it, waiting for the next move in an ancient game. Inside, the warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the chill that still clung to Clara, Elias, and Gabriel, a reminder of the night's eerie silence that followed their incantation. Gabriel, his eyes weary yet vigilant, stared into the flames. It's done. For now, the seal holds. But this is a temporary measure. We've merely pushed the darkness back, not destroyed it. Clara nodded, her thoughts drifting to her lost brother, to the countless others who might still be wandering lost among the shadows, their fates bound to the whims of the curse. So, we stay. We guard this place, keep the darkness at bay. It's our duty, Elias said, his voice resonant. He had lived in fear of the woods and what lay hidden beneath for too long. Now he felt a purpose, a call to protect not just their home but also the future from the horrors of the past. We will set up wards, continue to study the book, Gabriel added, outlining the plan. We must be prepared for whatever comes next. The curse has been challenged, and it will strike back. We need to be ready. As weeks turned into months, the wandering spirit became more than just a name. It transformed into a bastion against the darkness, a place where the boundary between the known and the unknown was guarded fiercely by those who had once been mere spectators in the tales of old. Clara, Elias, and Gabriel trained, their skills in the arcane arts growing stronger with each passing day. They became the keepers of secrets, the defenders of a fragile peace. And yet, the darkness lingered, a shadow on the edge of sight, always watching, always waiting. The final night 1 year after the night they reinforced the seal, as the first snow of winter began to fall, a darkness greater than before descended upon the village. It was not just the absence of light, but a palpable presence that smothered every candle, every hearth, leaving the wandering spirit isolated in a sea of shadows. They are coming, Gabriel murmured as he peered into the blackness. The wards they had set up around being pulsed with a soft blue light, the only barrier left against the encroaching darkness. Clara and Elias joined him, their faces set in grim determination. They had known this day would come, had prepared for it, yet facing the vastness of the dark was daunting. As they stood ready, the ground beneath them trembled, and from the woods came a sound like thunder, 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming shapes that were both human and not, an army of the cursed driven by the ancient malice of the woods. The three defenders chanted, their voices clear and strong, weaving spells of protection and light. The wards flared brighter, casting a protective dome around the inn. The shadows crashed against it like waves, each assault more ferocious than the last. The battle raged through the night, the darkness relentless in its fury. But as dawn approached, a faint light pierced the black sky, a single ray of sun slicing through the chaos. Seeing their chance, Gabriel raised his arms, the book open in his hands. Now he shouted over the roar of the storm. Together, they chanted the final incantation, a powerful spell woven from the very essence of light and life. A blinding flash illuminated the world, as if a second sun had risen on the horizon. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving under the onslaught of light, their presence evaporating like mist in the morning sun. As the light faded, silence fell. The darkness was gone, pushed back into the depths of the woods, sealed away once more. The village, though forever changed, was safe for now. Clara, Elias, and Gabriel stood before the wandering spirit, exhausted but alive. They had faced the darkness and survived. They had kept their promise to protect, to fight, to endure. But as they looked towards the woods, the memory of the night's terror lingered in their minds. The darkness had been defeated, but it had not been destroyed. It was a part of the land, as much as the trees and the wind and the snow. "We will remain," Gabriel said, his voice steady. "Guardians of the seal, watchers on the threshold. For as long as the darkness waits, so will we." And so, the wandering spirit remained a beacon in the night, a light against the darkness, guarded by those who knew the cost of vigilance. The curse was held at bay, but the story,